If you're someone who isn't from the UK but would like to acquire a British accent, then this video is for you. I have been contemplating of making this video, but this topic is a highly requested topic and something that I've been hearing again and again since I started my channel 2 years ago. If you're British though, you may notice that I may not sound 100% British, and that's because I'm not. I am an immigrant, but as someone who had more of an American accent, in this video I'll give you all the tips, the tricks, and all the things that I've picked up and what helps in terms of changing my accent to get closer to a British accent. So the accent that we'll be speaking of today is the received pronunciation or RP accent, which is classified as a classic or a standard accent in Britain. It is an accent based on the south of England, and sometimes you may have heard people call this differently. You may have heard people call it the BBC English or the Queen's English. They all refer to the same thing, which is the received pronunciation or the RP accent. Now, I think before we get onto the first tip, a general tip is that if you're speaking a different accent and you want to acquire a completely different accent or learning a new accent, I think it's really important to, every time you say a word or a sentence, do pay a lot of attention on how you pronounce the words. I find if I get too relaxed, because English is not my native language, sometimes if I'm too relaxed in terms of pronouncing certain words or certain sentences, then at times I may not sound very British. But if I do pay attention to how I say the words, because I'm still learning, right? We're learning together. Then if I'm paying attention, then I would sound a bit more British because it's just more intentional. So I think the first tip and the quick one, general rule of thumb, is to pay attention and be more intentional about how you're saying certain words. In terms of pronunciation, the first thing that I would like to touch on is the consonants or the non-vowels. And the first consonant is none other than the T. In British English or the RP pronunciation, the T is pronounced as a T. So I think in American English, the T is pronounced or sound like more of a D. For example, the word better. In American accent, one might pronounce it better, or instead of saying butter, it is butter, potter, bottle, university, city. And you can practice the whole thing by combining the words into one sentence. So for example, can I have a bottle of water? Or London is a better city. You know? Now I know that if you're already watching British films or listening to British podcasts, sometimes you may hear people pronouncing the T completely differently, where the T is silenced and not pronounced at all. So for example, instead of saying water, they will say water, or instead of saying butter, they will say butter. And that is not an RP accent. I think that's more of a specific part of London accent or Cockney accent. So that is not what we're talking about here. But I just thought I would bring it up. Next is the R sound. And I would like to split this into two sort of sets of rules. If there is an R in the word and follows by a vowel, then you pronounce R normally. For example, grid, British, abbreviation. However, if the vowel is placed before the R, most of the time the R is pretty much silenced and you don't really roll your tongue. For example, the word bid. If you put an R after the I, instead of saying bird, I'm not really good with American accent. In British accent, it is pronounced bird. So as you may notice, the R is very subtle and sort of silenced. You don't really roll the tongue, you don't really stress the R. Or the word pat. If you put R after the A, in American English, most likely this will be pronounced part. But in British English, it is pronounced part. Other words that you can try and practice is, for example, heart, farm, board, instead of board. I don't understand why I used to speak pretty heavy American accents, and after 5 years of living in the UK, I just lost it completely. Apart from the consonants, the vowels are also extremely important when it comes to learning a different accent. The next one is the schwa sound or reduced sound. There are loads of words actually that is considered under schwa sound. I will actually give you a list here on the screen. Some example, which we probably won't be able to cover all of them, but it's more like an sound. Example of some of the schwa words are actor, doctor, better, teacher, other. So it is an sound. So it's not better or doctor or actor. Is a short sound. The next one is an A sound, which is a sound that I picked up pretty soon after I moved here, because I was living in a city called Cheltenham and it's not far from a city called Bath. And when I heard people refer to this city Bath instead of Bath, I immediately realized that there is a difference in accent between British and American. So instead of pronouncing the A as because I think that's how it is being pronounced in America, in British English or in RP, A is pronounced like a very long A, like ah. So bath, fast, last, grass, class, can't, master. Another vowel is O, and with O, again, I like to split this into two sort of rules of thumb. The first one is if there is an O in the middle of the word, then you pronounce the O kind of short but very full on, like a big O. For example, the word stop. I think if you were to be speaking an American accent, I think is most likely going to sound like stop. But in British English, it is stop. Other words include, for example, top, spot, got, not, god, flop. As you can hear, it is quite a short O. You know, I think the word stop is quite clear to me. And another word that's quite clear when it comes to comparison between American English and British English is top as well. American accent would sound more like top. So yeah, there is a clear difference there. So if you were to pronounce this phrase in British English, it will be not a lot. But in American English, it's most likely going to be not a lot. The second rule of the O, I know there's so many rules, but bear with me because you thank me later. If there is an O at the end of the word, you will pronounce it not short, but very long and round O. So for example, the word memo or zero, hello, mango, tomato. So it is a big round long O instead of a snap short O like we talked about earlier. When we're talking about the received pronunciation accent, it is an accent, right? So it only concerns the pronunciation and actually not a vocabulary or not really about grammar. But because the pronunciation itself is spoken in England, so if you want to get closer to the accent, the British accent or the RP accent, then it would really help if you use the British vocabulary instead of American vocabulary. So there are certain words, the American version would be one word and the British version would be another word. So for example, the word pants in America, trousers in the UK, or the word trunk in the US would be the word boot in the UK. And there are loads more of day-to-day, widely spoken British vocabulary that people use all the time in day-to-day life. Like, for example, the word knackered is commonly used in the UK, which means tired. Or the word jog on, which basically means get lost in American English, I think. So choosing to use the British version of the vocabulary will help you getting closer to a British accent. I do actually have a video on British and American words. I think I haven't deleted that video, but go check that out. It's 2 years old, but some of the words are extremely commonly used and it will be helpful if you're someone who's learning. Another thing that I want to talk about in this video is centered around how to practice, because I understand it's all in good knowing, you know, the theories, the rules. However, when it comes to practicing, I think that is what all is going to make a huge difference. So it's nice to know how to actually put all these tips in practice. I did make a video titled How to Speak English Fluently a few years ago, and the tips are still quite up to date, so feel free to check that video out. But in addition to that video, I do want to emphasize, especially if you are someone who doesn't live in the UK, the necessity to listen or watch British related show or podcast, because you never ever learn an accent unless you absorb that accent, listen to the accent and try to mimic it. One other technique that is being commonly used is called mirroring, which is essentially what it sounds. You can listen to the podcast, or let's say you watch a series, and while you're listening to conversation, out of that whole conversation you pick out a phrase or a sentence that you want to mirror, and then you repeat it with the same accent and same pronunciation that the speaker has, and you practice it again and again until you nail it. Another thing is, in order to practice all these rules, I understand because I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. It can be quite overwhelming because there's just so many rules, you know, for example, the R in front of the vowels, the R after the vowel, etc, etc. It can be quite confusing and extremely overwhelming. So when I was learning, or when I was picking up the British accent, what I did was I would pick up a few things or a few tips that I am giving out in this video and practice. So for me, for example, when I first moved here, the very first thing that I picked up was how to pronounce the A properly. So instead of saying can't, I would say can't. Instead of saying bath, I would say bath. So I started off very small, and as a, first of all, non-native English speaker and someone who was speaking different accents, I can say that when you first start picking up or learning new accent, at first it could feel a little bit unnatural because it's new. You know, when you learn another language anyway, when you learn how to pronounce new things, just like when kids learn how to talk or pronounce words, it can feel unnatural at first. So don't let that hold you back. I did feel a little bit unnatural to say the word can't instead of can't, but over time, once you mastered it, it becomes a part of you. It becomes how you speak. Once you master that one thing, once you feel comfortable with pronouncing this thing, one tip or one rule, then you can move on to the next. And if you want to know how long it took me to sort of have acquired the British accent and have this accent, you can feel free to go back my very first video, which is still live on this channel. I haven't deleted it, I haven't taken it away, and I have no shame. But that was me 3 years living in the UK. I wasn't really practicing it religiously, but I managed to pick up some sort of British accent 3 years after living here. But you, my friend, if you're someone who are motivated and you know for sure that the British accent is the accent that you want to acquire, I am pretty sure that you can do way better than me and learn much, much faster than me. So I hope you found this video today very helpful. If you're looking for a tip, I hope you got them, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Otherwise, if you like this kind of video, then, you know, subscribe to the channel. If you don't want to subscribe, that's fine. Please do at least like the video, because that helps the channel very, very much, and I really appreciate it. I will see you in the next video, and in the meantime, please do take care of yourself.